everyone, and welcome. This is a quick tutorial on some particles. I've been getting asked a lot of questions on how to make things from ribbon emitters to just basic particle questions. So I threw together this little volcano, and it kind of has just the basics of pretty much everything you're going to encounter with particle effects. Of course, this is just one example. But you can kind of springboard from what you're going to learn here into just about any kind of particle effect you would ever want to make. And this will get you started with the general particle system of Stingray. Okay, so what we have here is basically just three particles, and those three particles are creating this whole kind of look and feel. And we're going to start with something very simple. Like these little sparks that are going off, okay, and I have those in the center of my volcano, and they're great for little things like little sparks or little things, right? Like little details that you want to not waste a lot of resources making look cool, but gives you that added little bit of life that's kind of nice. Okay, so so that'll be this guy. And that's just a very simple particle effect, and we're going to create that. Then we're going to go ahead and create this little more complicated smoke effect. Okay, and then actually I don't have one of the parts listed here. I don't have the fire, so I'm going to put the fire in, and this is kind of an order of complexity. Let's put this guy in there, and he's on his side, so I'm going to just put him on his side. And there we have like basically a raging fire, right? And this is a UV animation, so that'll be the third thing we'll be working on, is making a kind of a fire, which would be useful in a fireplace or any number of things. Okay. And here I have it kind of stretched out because I wanted that kind of fiery look coming from the volcano itself. Okay. So, but this is just a UV animation. And lastly, we're going to be doing the most complicated of the group, which is a ribbon animation complete with particle physics. So this is actually interacting with the world. And if we were to put this like, next to a box or something, it would actually bounce off the box. And as you can see here, it's actually interacting with the volcano itself. But to just illustrate that, I'm just going to drop a box here. Models, props, and chamf box. So I'm just going to put the chamf box next to it, and we should see it interact with that that box now. If anything actually spawns to hit it. Come on, bounce off of it. There we go. So now you can see that it's actually bouncing off that box. Alright, so this actually interacts with the physical world. Okay, so and what's also cool about this particle effect is we have a trail. This is actually a pretty complex particle effect, but we're going to save that for last. And we will just work up. By the end of this, you'll pretty much know how to make any particle effect type thing you would want to make. And if you mix and merge these concepts, you'll be able to make anything. All right. So so let's get started. All right. So I'm just going to delete these guys, and we're going to get started with our first particle. Okay. So that's going to be this simple guy. All right. So here we have just again, it's a extremely simple standard particle effect. There's really nothing special going on here, and it's a good start. Okay, so so let's start there. So the first thing you want to do is, in general, you want to have an effects folder. So what I do is in my content folder, I create a effects folder. You can name it effects, EFFECTS, or if you want to make it short, whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's just a folder name. But in general, I like to keep all of my particle effects in one folder. Then again, you can organize it how you want. But for now, let's just go ahead and create a particle effects folder. So go ahead and do that in your project folder, and we'll start from there. Inside of my particle effects, I generally make a textures folder, and that's where I'm going to keep things like my, animation sequence, or, all these other different pieces that I might need. And these are just textures that we're going to use for cards and stuff like that. Okay, so generally I like to make that textures folder as well right before I even start making my particles. Even if there's nothing in there, I just like to have my organization set up. Okay, so that said, let's go ahead and start with our first particle. Okay, so in here what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go right click, and I'm going to go create, and I'm going to go particle. Okay, and this is how you create any standard particle, or any particle effect system, period. Okay, so let's go ahead and create that, and we're going to call this Sparks 2. Okay, you can name yours whatever you'd like, but I'm calling it Sparks 2. All right, and we're just going to emulate what I did here. Okay, so what you want to do is then just drag your particle effect onto your stage. Okay, and now you've got your particle effect living in your world. Now notice though that you're not really getting anything to happen here. Okay, so you've just got a box, and it's basically just sitting there kind of glowing in its little glory. So you want to make it start to do stuff, and to make it do stuff, you're going to select the particle effect itself, and then over here on the right you're going to see that you have a bunch of different parameters. Okay, you've got the particle effect replay system, which if you wanted to do it in asset preview, which you're perfectly welcome to do, you can hit replay, and you will see that it actually starts playing your animation. And this is especially useful if you're doing burst animations, which is the only type that I'm not really doing, and that's all you would do is change your emitter rate from an emitter rate to emitter burst. Okay, and that's for things like a explosion that you want to trigger specifically, which maybe I'll do something about that later, but for now let's just stick with an emitter rate. So hitting replay is just going to make it play and play and play. It'll never stop. It's just going to keep going. And for emitter rates, I actually find that my level viewport is actually a better viewing tool. So I usually just drag it on stage, and then every time I make a change, I just hit the save icon, and I can see my changes as they go. Okay, so but back to the particle effect. So what's happening here is right now we've got an emitter. It's making 10 particles a second because they're both set to 10. So we have a min and a max value. So it's making a minimum of 10 particles a second and a maximum of 10 particles a second, which means it's making 10 particles a second. But all we see is one dot. Okay, so what the problem is it's not doing anything. It's just sitting still. So it's just creating one dot over the next, over the next, over the next, and it's not actually doing anything. So what we want to do is make it do something. So the first thing that I like to do is I usually give it something of a speed. So we can either use a velocity, or in this case we're gonna use an acceleration, and we're gonna use gravity. Okay, and as soon as I hit gravity, you're gonna see that we start getting something to happen. Okay, so those particles are now doing something. Okay, now we don't want ours to go down, we want ours to go up. So let's go ahead and give this a positive value of something like 1.5, and let's see what that looks like. So with a 1.5 we're starting to get a nice speed out of it. But what we're still getting the problem of is that we have a lot of them overlapping and kind of not really looking very good. So there's a couple ways we can solve that. We can give it more speed, right? If we were to give it more speed, something like a 9 in our gravity, you'll see that we start to get them to do a little more, right? Like they're now separating. Okay, so but we don't really need that much speed. What we really want is to put that back down to 1.5, and what we're going to do is we're going to give it some different positioning across the box that it lives in. Okay, so let's go ahead and go add position int, and we want to go box. So this is kind of like, where am I going to be born from? And we're going to, instead of having it born in one point, we're going to have it born within the size of a box. Okay, so let's go ahead and say position box, and let's hit save. And you'll see immediately that you start to get this kind of wild pattern of particles, and that's going to be a lot more like what we want. Now this box minimum and box maximum, that's basically like, I guess the easiest way to describe it would be saying defining the 2 points, 2 corners of a cube. So if we have, the box minimum is going to be this point right down here, and the box maximum is going to be this point up here, and then the box is kind of just defined from those 2 points because it's always a cube, so therefore the sides are always going to be the same. So the farther away these 2 points are, the bigger the box is going to be. And it's not really a cube, it's a rectangular cube. So because we can make it not necessarily square on all sides. So so on our box minimum, let's just lower that down, and let's put that to something like -0.25, -0.25, -0.25, and that's where make the box maximum 0.25, 0.25, and 0.25. And now we're going to have a smaller box that these are being born within. All right. So so that's just how you kind of control this. Now, if you didn't want it to be so tall, like you didn't have them being born up and down as well, you could set this both to 0. Oops. And 0. And now what you're basically doing is, crushing that box vertically. So now you're only being born across a parallel plane or a flat plane. You can also make it so that you only have a positive value by putting this to 1, and now you'll see that they're only born above that line. So I'm just kind of showing you how this system works. Generally speaking, I usually leave the z at 0, again, depending on what you're doing. But most of the time, I want them just kind of controlled in that regard. So all I want is like the kind of spacing around the outside, right? So it's like a XY spacing, not a Z spacing. But again, that's very much up to you. You now know how to use the box position controller. So so yeah, so now we have them kind of doing what we want, right? We're starting to get that look of what we've got over here. But we're still not getting that movement, right? We want to get that movement going, okay? So let's just go back into our particle, and let's go ahead and say right click, and then let's go position control, and we're going to go spiral, okay? And as soon as we add the spiral, we're going to start to see something happening here. So the one value that we don't have is this speed, so let's go ahead and give it some speed. So let's give it a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 10, let's say, and let's just see what that does. It's probably going to be wild. Nope, that's actually looking pretty good. Okay, so we're getting kind of that little spirally motion that we were getting out of this guy over here. And let's go ahead and increase the amount that it can rotate. So let's set the minimum to 90, and let's set the maximum to 180 degrees. And let's hit save. And now we'll see that we're starting to get a little more variation. So anytime you change the range of this min and max, you'll have more variation in your particles. It's basically like a randomization function that is saying the slowest I want my particles to rotate is 90, and the fastest I want them to rotate is 180. And each particle that is born will be born within those two ranges. Okay, so you'll see that a lot throughout this particle system. Anywhere in here. So like a lot of things have this min-max concept, and it's really kind of important to grasp. It's not too hard, but yeah, you'll get it. So I'm going to set this now to 360. And see if I can increase that variance range a little bit. And now I should start to get what I want. Some of them are going a little too fast though. Maybe not so problematic though. I mean, a volcano has a lot of kind of movement, and there's a lot of stuff happening inside of a volcano. So I don't mind that they're moving a little erratically. So I think I kind of like that. And that's going to be pretty much it for the spiral. Now what we're going to want to do is kind of control this size, because those particles are looking pretty big. So to me, they're just too big. So what I want to do is I'm going to again use this min-max concept, and I'm going to set my minimum size to something like 0.025, and my maximum size is going to be something like 0.08. I think will be probably pretty good. So let's go ahead and try that out. And now again, you can see that some of them are being born small, some of them are being born big, and we kind of have that nice variation in our particle. I think the large sizes are still a little bit too big, so I'm going to go 0.05, and I'm going to hit save and take a look at how that feels. And that feels pretty good, okay? So the next thing I'm going to want to do is just increase my speed a little more. It's not really going up as high as I'd like it to. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to change the speed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the lifetime, because I didn't get into this yet and it's kind of important. Okay, so here what you have is the controls that are like kind of like the overarching controls of your particle effect. We can do things in here like change our system name. So if I wanted to name this Sparks, I could, which will become more important when you have multiple particle effects within one particle effect. So each one of these can have systems. So like right now we've got a system called Sparks. I could add another system and it would be a whole nother set of particles that exist here. We're not going to get into that yet, but I'm just kind of showing you that you can name them and that can be useful. Now your particle life is your next important thing. Now, this is how long your particle will survive. So if we were to set this to something like 100, right, and I believe this counts in seconds, you'll see that our particles are going to go way up in the air. See how long they live? Okay, so, but you'll notice now that, well, what happened? Why are there not any more being born? Well, you created, in our emitter rate, we've created 10 particles, okay? But our total number of particles created is only allowed to be 10, okay? So even though this is making 10 per second, this is saying, oh, well, you're only allowed to make 10. And since we gave it such a long particle life, there now aren't enough total to allow for that to happen. So basically, those particles are still alive. Those initial 10 were born, and they're still alive. They're still floating like way up in space. So just be aware that this total will limit the amount of particles that you're allowed to have in a system. So if you ever come to a point where you're like, why am I not seeing particles, or why are my particles like being erratic, check this total, because it can kind of mess you up sometimes. It's also a very useful limiter, so just be aware of that too, because sometimes you don't necessarily want your particles to overwhelmingly create particles. So you can use this as kind of like a de facto limiter, which can be used for performance gains. It can also be used for all sorts of controls. So just something relatively useful to know. All right, so now you can see that we're getting a more consistent stream, but now I have 1,000 particles on stage living at a time. Okay, so anyway, so that's how you're going to control your lifetimes. Now this particle life, another, I don't want it that long, so let's go something more like between 2 and 5, and now that 1,000 will never even be encroached upon, but that's okay. So now we're 2 and 5 is still too long. Let's do something more like 1 and 2. That should be a little better. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, between 1 and 2 seconds they live now. And so what else do we need? That's pretty much it. So okay, so let's go into our emitter rate and let's kind of play with that a little bit. So right now what we're getting is a very consistent stream of particles. And what I'd like to do is not necessarily have those particles be so constant, right? Like in a fire, you're going to have this kind of erratic quality of how the particles are going to be born. Sometimes they're going to spark, sometimes they're not. So yeah, so we want to kind of make that a little more random. So again, we're going to use this very simple randomization function by going from a minimum of 1 per second and a maximum of 10 per seconds. And when I hit save, you'll see that we now have a bit more of an erratic kind of birthing process. Okay, sometimes there's little gaps, sometimes there's not. It just makes it feel a lot more natural and believable. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do is, well, I want to get rid of this material billboard. This is an unnecessary for us on this particle because we're not actually going to be putting any kind of like cards over it. So for a standard particle effect, I always just get rid of this guy. That just gets rid of it, and it's just not necessary, so no reason to keep it. So we've got our emitter rate, we've got our size, and one thing that I always like to do is kind of control the size of the particles over time. And this particle scale is really good for that. So for this type of a particle, I would basically want it to diminish over time. So it's going to become smaller and smaller as the time goes further on. So I'm just going to drag this little guy down, and you'll see these graphs all over the place in Stingray. I mean, in the particle effect system of Stingray. So it's just a really useful little graphing tool. And basically what 0 is the birth of the particle, and 1 is the death of the particle. So from the birth point, it's going to stay at normal size, and it's going to go down to, you know, basically non-existent, or a scale of 0 at the death of the particle. Okay, and if we hit save, we'll see that it slowly just takes those particles and makes them nice and small. Now, as you can see, they're getting too small too quickly, so we can go ahead and add another little point here and just kind of like, you know, gradiate it at the end. So we're going to kind of keep it almost the full size, and we're just going to kind of like drop it off towards the end. And if we hit save, we should see that that feels a lot better now. So yeah, that feels pretty good to me. Okay, so the next thing is going to be our color. Right now we have a pretty simple color. It's white. What we want to do is have it gradiate over time. Again, the left side is going to be your birth, and the right side is going to be your death. So if we slide this guy over to the left and double click it and give it an, I don't know, a color of red, let's say, or a nice burnt dark red, reddish orange. So if we go into the ring color, let's go ahead and make it like a nice dark brownish red, and let's add another little point here, and let's make that one like a middle orange, and let's add a third color, and let's make that a bright whitish yellow, right, like a real nice bright white yellow, maybe even a little more white than that is what I was thinking. So this is a little weird thing. If you click on the ring, it just doesn't work. So click spect and then ring, and then you can get the ring to show. So just something I've noticed. I'm actually going to issue a bug report about that. Okay, so so here we go, and if I hit OK, you should see a nice gradient emerge. And when we do it in our particles, you'll see that we get this nice gradient over time. Towards the top, they're becoming that nice yellowish quality right at the tip, and at the bottom they're dark orange, and they're kind of gradiating through. All right, so so that's going to pretty much wrap up the standard simple particle effects. There's a lot more you can do with these. Okay, you can go crazy. You can add all sorts of different things. I mean, anything you want to do in here, you can try and play with. I recommend it on these simple particles because you can really see their effect easily, and it doesn't, you know, it's not hard to do, and you can do all sorts of things like add velocities, or, you know, I wouldn't do a spawn trail yet. Wait until that's going to be what we do later. But you can do size by life, size by variable, you can do rotations, you can do all sorts of different things in here. But this gets you started with your particle effects. Okay. And that's it. All right, so let's now move on to our next particle. Okay, let's do the fire effect. All right, so let's kill this one. I'm sorry, not the fire, let's do the smoke. Okay, so I'm just going to bring the smoke on stage, and we can start thinking about how we're going to approach it. Okay, so this is actually not very much different than what we just did. In fact, it's extremely similar. The only difference is that component that we deleted last time, in this one we're going to use. Okay, so in the last one, if we go ahead and look at this particle effect, I'm just going to get the smoke, simple smoke, and I'm going to tab it down, and we're just going to take a look here. And if you'll notice, what we're using here is a material billboard. And I've brought in a material map that I'm using for the material. Outside of that, it's basically the exact same thing as the last particle that we created. Okay, so I'm just going to show you what I'm using. In Photoshop, I created this really simple, kind of cloudy looking, thing. And I just did that with some grunge brushes. I painted them up, blurred them, did a little here and there, and just kind of created this very simple PNG file that is my smoke. Okay, and I'll just give you a black underscore so you can kind of see what it really looks like, just because it's hard to see with that checkerboard background. Edit, fill black, no preserve transparency. So that's kind of what it looks like, right? Again, it's a very simple, thing. The only thing that's really important to realize is that I never actually touch the edges, or I try not to. Like here, it might be a little close. Here, it's a little close. But for all intents and purposes, I basically don't want, a lot of, it to touch the edges, because it'll show as the edge of a box, right? Like if it cuts off. So you want to make sure everything is within the edges. Like, see how I'm fading it out over here? I don't even want that to stick out. This is probably fading like right. It's good enough. You know what I mean? But the idea is don't go right to the edges. Try to give yourself a little padding so that the edge of your box doesn't look like the edge of a box. Okay. Outside of that, you just want it to be transparent background, and you're going to save it as a PNG file. Okay. Once you save it as a PNG file, inside of Stingray, you'll go into your textures folder, you're going to go import, and you're just going to import that as a texture. Okay, so once I did, this is the material I have, and I'm just going to show you how that works now. So if I go into my smoke effect, so let's actually recreate this one too, just like I did the last one. And we're going to have a lot of the same things. So let's go ahead and go right click, and we're going to go create particle. And we're going to call this one Simple Smoke 2. Okay, so I'm going to drag this Simple Smoke 2 onto the stage, and we're going to get going again. All right, so with this one, we're going to have that same kind of thing. We want to start with a gravity. So I'm just going to grab my Simple Smoke 2, and I'm going to tab down the system. And I'm going to go ahead and give it an acceleration of gravity. And I want it to be something a little slower than what we had last time. So I think it's probably going to be a 1 is going to be good enough. And I'm going to save it. And we should start to see that we get our particles forming here. Okay, so now we've just got simple particles floating up. We now are going to go into our material billboard. I'm going to go and grab that texture that I imported, and I'm going to save it. I'm not sure why it's not showing. Let's see what's going on here. I am in Simple Smoke 2, yes. Meta rate, size. Let's try changing this size to something like 1. There we go. So for some reason it just wasn't updating, but now it's updating. So now we're getting this kind of blotchy, weird looking thing. Okay, so with this type of a particle effect, you really want to try to manage the numbers that you're creating. Okay, so right now we're creating 10 at a time, and again we have that total lifetime of 10. The total amount of 10. So first thing we're going to want to do is increase this lifetime to something more like, I don't know, something like 2 to 3 seconds, let's say, so that it can live long enough to kind of go up there. But we're creating way too many per second. So let's go ahead and give that rate something more reasonable, like 1 to 3 per second. And that should start to feel a little better. It's still a little too chunky, so let's go 3 to 5 maybe, and see how that looks. Yeah, that's going to be a little better. And now let's go ahead and give it that that position again. So we're going to go position int, and we're going to go box, and let's just try it like that. It's probably going to be a little chaotic. Yep, that's too much. So let's do something more like -0.25, -0.25, -0.25, 0.25, 0.25, and 0.25. Okay, and let's hit save. All right, so now we're going to get a little bit of offsetting, and we're kind of getting closer to what we want. In fact, I think it could even be a little wider. Let's try -0.5, -0.5. This time I'm just going to make my life a little easier by copying this and pasting it, and pasting it. And then I'm just going to go 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5. And I'm going to save it and just see how that feels. Yeah, that's definitely a little bit better. Okay, so so now I've got it kind of working. In my color, this is going to be the kind of the big thing. I want to set my opacity down. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to start it basically at 0, and then I want it to increase a little bit, and then I want it to decrease over time. So I'm basically becoming a little bit opaque, and then I'm kind of fading out. And we should see that that's going to give some immediately good results. And as you can see, it's starting to feel way better already. We're starting to not overwhelm the coloring. Okay, so speaking of coloring, let's go ahead and let's mess with that now. So color, and oh, I was already in color. So let's go ahead and gradiate this also. So I kind of wanted mine, oops, cancel. I kind of wanted mine to be like, you know, a little reddish at the bottom so that it matched the, like over here it looks really nice, right? Like when you have the light on it and it's got that red and the darks, you know, it starts to look really good. So what I'm going to do is the same kind of thing. I'm just going to go for that same look. So I'm going to go for this dark reddish. So again, I got to do that, and I'm just going to put that like dark red to start with its lifetime, and it's going to go to this, you know, charcoaly gray color. So let's go to that. All right, and we're going to save it, and we should start to feel pretty good. It's a little too red. I think I'm going to lower that redness quality and make it a little more black. So let's get that a little more charcoaly red kind of look. Yeah, it's starting to feel good. All right. So I think I'm going a little too transparent now. So let's go ahead and increase our opacity a touch, and I'm just going to give it a little bit more of a fall off towards the end, that it's a little bit of a break off, just to make it kind of not quite so, you know. Now it's gotten a little too opaque, so let's go ahead and drop that down some. See how that feels. That's starting to get there. So this is just now, you know, a matter of getting it in the pocket, right? Like you just want it to feel good now, and you're just going to kind of tweak some adjustments. The basics are there. So size, you know, we'll probably mess with the size a little bit. We'll make the initial size between 1 and 2, let's say. And let's take a look at that. And that's starting to feel pretty good. Actually feels better than the original one, almost. Maybe it does even. Feels pretty good. So that's the basics of a you know, simple particle. Oh, one other thing that I did was just for fun. I gave it a acceleration of vector wind field, and this is pretty straightforward. You just put it on, and when you hit save, you'll see what happens. So here you can see we're getting a lot of variation. So we don't really want that much kind of craziness going on. So what I usually do is I just set this noise down to something more like 0.1, just so that it's not so chaotic, and we start to get what we're looking for then. So we can even change our wind coefficient to something more like 2 and see how it goes. And now we should get a little mixture of the wind plus the rising of the gravity. Now you can always just adjust up your gravity once you do this. So let's just find gravity, and we can just adjust that up to something more like 2, since the wind is kind of slowing it down. And now you should have what you're looking for. And you can always kind of balance those two out, you know, with your vector wind. You can just kind of increase this, you know, make it a little more windy, which is probably going to slow it down again some. can increase your noise, so 0.2, until you get, you know, kind of where you're happy. So this is just tweaks and playing now until you get it right. And let's go to our spawn rate. And yeah, 3 to 5 should be good. We could make this a little more erratic by opening that gap. I put it to 2 and 5 instead of 3 and 5, and that's starting to feel pretty good. Maybe a little bit more gravity, so let's give it a little bit like a 3. See how that feels. Yeah, it's feeling pretty good. So there you have it. All right. So that's the entirety of making a particle like this guy. You know, where you're gonna want just a billboard. Okay, so this is called a billboard animation, and it's mostly driven from this billboard right here. Okay. You can also do additive blend. Sometimes that can be helpful. It gives it a little bit more of a soft look, rather than, see how it's now a little softer. So it just helps blend a little better. But when you do it as a transparent PNG, you don't really need to do this. The additive blend is mostly used for when you're doing a blend that does not have, like, let's say you're doing like a black background, the black would drop when you do the additive blend. All right, so I'll just turn that back off because it is costly to run that. So it's much better to do what we did, which is it's much better to do it as a transparent PNG where you're getting the proper transparencies right from the PNG file. Okay, so is there anything else we want to do to this guy? I think that pretty much does it. We could do, you know, a slight rotation. We could do rotation by velocity. That could be useful. You know what? I don't even think I want to do this. I'm just going to remove that one. I'm going to add a different rotation type. Rotation random. And we can just give it a very slight random rotation of, like, you know, 10 degrees or 20 degrees maybe. And that'll let it kind of give a little more variation to it. Boy, that's almost non-noticeable. Let's try kicking it up some more. Of course, the best effects are the ones that are very subtle. So yeah, I think I liked it better the way it was. Let's just leave it without the random rotation, and we'll call that done. All right, so play with this, and you can kind of do what you'd like. All right, but you get the basic idea. That's how you would make a smoky particle effect. All right, and again, that is with the material billboard. All right, so let's go ahead and delete that guy now. And let's move on to our next particle. Okay, so this next part of the particle creation is a little more complicated. And it's not more complicated in Stingray, it's more complicated outside of Stingray. So we're gonna have to look at some other tools, and I'll show you how we kind of do this kind of stuff. But I'm not gonna get into the nitpicky details of how to create a UV animation. I'm just gonna show you the process of, once you've got one made, how to get it into Stingray. Just because that would be just way too big of a scope. I can't do that big of a tutorial right now. Okay, so I'm just gonna do what we've done, and I'm just gonna kind of bring this particle effect in here. And since this one is a UV animation, I have it set to not rotate with the camera, so I just have to put it in position. And as you can see, I've just got a very simple fire burning, right? So what this is basically the same as what we just did. The difference is on the billboard itself. If we go into here and look at the fire, okay, you know, you'll see that we have a material billboard. This one is actually even simpler than the smoke effect, because all of it's really being done in the animation itself. And all we're doing is cueing a UV animation, and as you can see here, and we're giving it a frames per second, and we're just letting it play. So this is almost acting as a movie controller more than it is a particle effect, technically speaking. What it's basically doing is creating one particle per second, and it's effectively, you know, taking a frame of the animation and putting it on each particle, and each particle is being born in the same place every time. Okay, so it's extremely straightforward. We'll get to it, but where we have to begin is how do I actually get a UV animation into the game engine? Because that can be a challenge to do, and that's where this is probably the most complicated. Okay, so if you are used to After Effects, After Effects is the tool that I use to create my animations, and it's a really good tool for this kind of thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you, alright, so I've got this basic animation that I made. If I hit play, it makes, you know, fire burn, right? So I've got a simple animation. This could be made anywhere. You could video a fire, you could do whatever you want, right? And in the end, all you really need is an animation sequence, okay? And then from the animation sequence, you are then going to make a UV tile sheet, or a UV sprite sheet is the more common term for it. So what I've done is I've kind of picked out an area of my animation where I know it'll loop okay. Okay, so it's looping and it looks pretty good. It'll always loop. It's not really a problem, right? Like if I were to pick it up at any point in the frame sequence, it's going to be pretty much perfect. Okay, so so here we have the fire burning, and I know that that can pretty much be picked up and repeated anywhere. And you won't see a hiccup or a glitch, right? It's not like fading in and then fading out, and if it was to, you know, get cut off, it would be like weird. You know, it's just it's a loopable animation basically. All right, and then all I do is I just go ahead and I go into my render queue and I output the files as PNG files. Okay, so I get a whole sequence of PNGs. I will show you a couple basics in here in the export. So what I basically do is I just I'm just gonna delete this comp, delete, and I'll show you how we're gonna go ahead and export this from here. So I'm just gonna take this composition and I'm gonna go add to render queue. And all I basically do is I set my render output to PNG, and I don't even do anything else on the export. What I do though is I do resize it. So if I know that my final UV tile sheet is going to be something like a 2048, which is generally what I use for this type of thing, depending, I will then just get my calculator out, figure out my columns, and so I'm sorry, I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit, and I hope I'm not super confusing. But basically, how the UV, you know, let's look at a UV tile sheet. That would probably be the best. So let's go into Photoshop. I'll open up my UV tile sheet just so you can see what the final output is going to be, so we know what I'm talking about when I say why I'm doing what I'm doing. So let's go to desktop. I think I created a copy out there. Fire sequence and comp 1, and here we go. So this is a tile sheet, okay, or a sprite sheet, and basically what it is a sequence of animations that starts from the top left, goes across, and then goes across, and then goes across, and then goes across, and then goes across. So you're basically moving a playhead from, you know, here to here to here to here, and you're kind of just flip booking through this, okay? And by the way, if you do a flip book animation, this would be the same way you would do it. So the concept is that you're just creating multiple frames on one texture. So now you can just move a playhead across this to make it work. And the only thing that's really important about this is knowing how many columns and how many rows. Okay, so I know that I want to have 5 columns and 5 rows. I could make it 2 columns and 2 rows. It doesn't really make a difference, just so long as I know what I want to end up with. Okay, and I'll show you how that plays in Stingray later. But I know for my purposes I wanted 25 frames to make it kind of a smooth fire burning animation, so I did 25 frames. So in here, what I basically do is I say, okay, I know I want my total size to be 2048. So what I want to do is figure out what approximately is the math to figure out how many pixels across do I need each frame to be. So all I do is go 2048, which is going to be my total size, and I'm going to divide that by 5. And I get 409. I'm going to round to 410. So in here, I would set my resize value to 410 by 410. Okay, and that's basically it. I hit OK, and then I'm just going to choose my folder. Pick where I want to output to. I'm going to go to the desktop again, and I'm going to call this new folder. I'll call it Fire 2, Fire Sequence 2. Ugh, I hate when I do that, but stupid caps lock. And I'm going to go ahead and save it out. Save. And then I just hit the render queue. It renders out my frames. Once the frames are rendered, I'm going to go ahead and minimize my calculator now, minimize Stingray. And now what I use is a program called Glue-It. And you can pick this up on the web. It's just called Glue-It. I think it's free. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's free. And it's a great little tool for creating these kind of like sprite sheets. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go add. I know that I need 25 frames, so let me find my Fire Sequence 2. And all I'm going to do is grab 25 frames. I know that I need 25. I output more than 25, but I only want 25. So I'm going to go from frame 90 to frame 114. That'll make 25 frames. And hit open. It'll then give me this, this sequence. And now I can say glue it. It gives me the necessary parts that I want. I hit close. I hit save. And I just choose where I want to save that to. So I'm going to call this sprite sheet or fire sheet. Okay. And I'm just going to save it in the same folder as I created the other ones. And hit save. And that's it. I'm basically done. There is one last step that's a good thing to do, and that is to make sure that it actually is an exact either 2048 or 1024 or 512 by 512, one of those, because those are just the most optimal for game engines. So I'm just going to open it up, and since we did 210, it's not going to be 1024, it's going to be a little bigger. So I'm just going to open up that sequence. What did I call it? I called it Fire Sequence 2 comp. I'm just going to open this guy up. It's going to be the wrong size, so if I go image size, you'll see that it's 2050. I really want it to be 2048, so I'm just going to set that to 2048 and call that done. All right, and then I just go File, Save As, or actually I don't even have to do that. I can just go File, Save, and I'm done. All right, so now I can import that into Stingray. So let's go into Stingray, and let's go into textures, and just to prove that it all works, I will import this guy when we do this next material. Desktop, Fire Sequence, Comp 1, and I'm going to grab this fire sheet. Okay. So there I've got my fire sheet, and it's actually a different fire. So that's pretty cool. So we will now go ahead and create our new particle effect for Fire 2. Okay, so we're going to go create particle, and we're going to call this Fire _ 2. All right. Now let's go into the system. Let's drag it on stage. And let's look at what we're going to do here. Okay, so Fire 2. So the first thing I know is I want to grab the billboard. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab my newly created fire sheet and drag that into the billboard. Now that that's done, I know that my UV animation needs to be within, so how do I explain this? So the UV animation is what your column width is going to be and your row width or row height is going to be. Now how you deduce this is you just simply take 1 and divide it by the number of your frames. So if I have 5 frames across and 5 frames down, I'm just going to go 1 divided by 5 equals 0.2. So that is the correct number for that. If you had, let's say, 3 frames, you know, it's going to be the same exact thing. It's going to be, let's say it was 3 across and 3 down and you had a 9 sequence animation. You would just go 1 divided by 3, and it would be 0.333. Okay, so that would be your input here. If you had, let's say you only had a sprite sheet that was consisting of 3 across but 6 down, then you would do 2 different divisions, right? You would do, so 3 across would be 1 divided by 3 is 333. And if you wanted the 6, it would be 1 divided by 6 equals 0.166. So you would have, you know, 0.033 here, or I'm sorry, 0.333, 0.333, and 0.666. I think that's what it was, right? Is that what I just calculated? 0.166, sorry. 0.166. Okay, so that would give you 3 across and 6 down. Okay, it's a little complicated. Don't get too confused. For most cases, you're going to have it as a square, so it's going to be, you know, 0.2 for 0.2 for me, for 5 across. Anyway, I don't want to belabor that. You'll figure it out. It's not super hard. Just know that you always divide whatever your frame number is by 1, and you'll get it. And that's that. So let's go ahead and save that. And you'll see now that we're getting this particle being born, but it shows all the particles, right? It shows all the frames of our animation. It's not really cycling through it, okay? So the reason for that is we haven't actually added the animation component yet. So let's go into here and let's go material, and we're gonna go UV animation, okay? So once we add that, we should start to see something happen, okay? So let's save, and now we see that there's only 1 frame showing. So now what the problem is that we're in our UV animation node, we're not getting a range, okay? So what we want to do is say how many frames of this sequence do we want to play. So we want to do from 0 to 24, which would make a total of 25 frames. And now you will start to see this play. And I did hit loop, and I hit random start, just because random start's a nice little feature. So it's kind of small. Let's go ahead and make this something like 1 and 1. And now we're starting to get a nice little fire animation. Okay, so in the material billboard, we're going to want to do additive blend. Give it a second to compile. So, so we're starting to get something that works. Now you'll notice that we're getting this kind of like mushy quality to our animation playback. So what that is that our emitter rate and our system life is not working to our advantage. So what we really want to do is just increase our total to 1. And we want to make our particle life really, really high. So I usually set it to 1,000 and 1,000, and you will find that this starts to work a lot more acceptably. So basically you only want 1 to ever exist, and you just don't want the particle life to be a problem. So you just set it really high, and the total will always overwrite it. So no problem at all. Okay, so so there you have it. That's how you're going to create your billboard fire animation, and it's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. Okay, so So that's it. That's really all there is to this type of a particle effect. Um, you should be fine with that, with what you've already known. So you can change your size, of course. You can make this 2 and 2 and save it out, and it'll just be bigger. But effectively, that's all there really is to creating one of these animations. All right. Now on mine, I didn't want it to rotate. So what you can do is, so this is always going to face the camera if you don't do what I'm going to show you. And most of the times that's what you're going to want. For mine, I had a wide one and it was kind of looking weird. So I just added the non-rotation component to it. So I'll just show you how to do that because it is kind because it is kind of useful every now and again. So let's go into our particle effect. So fire 2. And let's go ahead and just go ahead add, and we're going to go position control, I'm sorry, rotation, and you want to go facing direction box. And this is a really weird little thing here. So what I usually do is I just leave it where it falls, and I just rotate it into the position that I want it. So, you know, if I want it to be, you know, like this, is what I would do. All right, and now it won't rotate anymore. You can play with that box. I've found it to be very difficult to figure out. So in general, rather than trying to make it do what I want, I just move it to where I want it. It just is a lot easier. All right, so so that's basically it for the UV animation. Okay. And next up, we're going to move into the most complicated trail animations. Okay, so we'll do that next. And it's not even that complicated. It's actually pretty easy. Well, with what you know now, you should be pretty good to go for making particles like that. And yeah, we'll get onto it right next. Okay, so now that we're done with the fire animations, I'm just going to go ahead and delete these guys. And we're going to move on to the last particle, okay? So let's drag him out on stage and let's kind of investigate what he works like, all right? So I'm going to grab my ribbon trails animation, and I'm just going to drag it onto stage and take a look. Okay, now, it may seem like this is pretty complicated, right? Like we've got these kind of billowing trails, and we've got this particle coming out, and all sorts of stuff. But in reality, it's actually pretty straightforward. The biggest thing is that it's kind of two systems that are linked together, and outside of that, it's really straightforward. Okay, so so let's go ahead and let's take a look at what it's got going on. So I'm going to grab my ribbon trails and I'm just going to take a look. So as you can see, the first thing you'll notice is that there are two systems, okay? And if I wanted to be proper about it, I would name the systems so that they make sense. So this will be the, I don't know, rock, and this will be the trail, okay? So, so that's really it. So we've got a rock and a trail, and the trail is spawned by the rock, okay? So inside of here, you're going to notice that we have this trail spawn node, and basically all it does is say, okay, well, what subsystem do you want me to use? And it just grabs the subsystem of trail from it, okay? But we'll get into how all this works, and this is the stuff you need for the collision detection. Outside of that, it's all stuff you've seen before. Emitter rate, material billboard, you know, a size, a color, a velocity. I don't know if we've really covered the velocity box much, but that's good because we'll get a chance to use it now. And the position box, which you've seen before, okay? And then the trail is nothing you've not seen before either. So we've got an emitter rate, we've got a material billboard, we've got a size, we've got a color, a little bit of random rotation, and a distance fade, which you don't even need. You can actually just remove that. It doesn't actually benefit it much at all. It basically just makes it so that as it gets really far away, it fades out. But that's easy. We'll go through it all. All right. So so that's it. So that's the basics of the system, and let's go ahead and build it. All right. So actually, yeah, it's kind of confusing to have that thing blowing up all over the place. So I'm just gonna start afresh. Okay. So the first thing we're going to want to do is the same thing we do for every particle effect. We're going to go right click and we're going to go create and we're going to go particle and we're going to say what did I call it? Ribbon trail. So I'll call it ribbon trail 2. Okay, and keep it consistent with the underscore. Okay, so now I've got ribbon trail 2 created. To make this work, the first thing I'm going to need is a material billboard. So, well, you don't even need that technically. You could just do it with a simple particle also, but I'm trying to make it a little nice. So I'm going to grab this card and I'm going to use the billboard to make it so that it's not just a little particle. It's going to be an actual rock. Okay, so I've got this little red rock that's kind of like a burning, smoldering, red kind of molten rock, and I'm going to use it as my diffuse map. Okay, so then I'm just going to set my color, my size to something like 1. See how that feels in size, and now I can put this on the stage and see what we've got. So where's the ribbon trail 2? And we'll have the typical rock not going anywhere, and that's what we've got. Okay, so as usual, we have to give it a movement to start seeing it do something. So so let's go ahead and do that. So ribbon trail 2, I'm going to go and give it a movement. So I'm going to go, but in this case, we're not going to use gravity this time. We're going to use a velocity. So we're going to go ahead and hit a box velocity, and let's just go ahead and save that and see what it starts doing. Okay, so as you can see, this pushes out in all directions based off its starting position. And it already is kind of what we want, right? The only real thing is we wanted to throw them more up in the air. So let's make the z velocity, rather than having the possibility of pushing it downward, we're only going to push it upward. Okay, so we're going to say a box minimum of 1 and a box maximum of something like 3, and let's see how that works. Okay, so there we go. We're starting to get it to make a plume. And we want these outside ones there too, because those are going to be helpful in making it not so perfect, right? Like they'll make it kind of splay out to the sides as well. And let's make this one more like 5 and our minimum velocity more like 2. Let's take a look and see how that feels. So yeah, now we're starting to get it to do something. Now, the problem is it's not coming back down to earth, right? So we want it to feel like it's got that draw on it. So what we're going to do is we're now going to add our gravity. So acceleration and gravity. And once we put that on, we should start to feel it looking pretty good. So it's doing what we want, but it's not quite perfect, right? Like it's definitely going a little bit too slow but fast, right? Like it's kind of like falling over quickly and it's kind of feeling a little weird. So so let's just increase our upward velocity. Let's make it something more like 10, since now it has to fight gravity. And now it's starting to feel a little better. And let's make this more like 5, and let's save that and see how that feels. And now it's starting to feel a lot better. So what we now need is a little more outward velocity. So let's go -5, -5, 5, and 5. And let's see how that feels. We should start to get kind of a better, overall feeling. Let's make our size of our particles something more reasonable, something more like, I don't know, 0.3 and 0.3, since 1 is just ginormous. Yeah, that's feeling better. Maybe even more like 0.5. Okay, that's good. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with a range of 0.3 to 0.5 just to give it some variation. And it's starting to feel pretty good. So the next thing we want to do is increase its particle life. So let's go ahead and make the particle life between 3 and 5 seconds. And let's increase our number total to something like 1,000. And see what we got. All right, that's pretty good. So now what we need to do is lower the rate or make it more erratic. So let's go 1 and 10. And that's starting to feel pretty good. I think we could probably go something more like 1 and 5. And that's going to feel a little better. Yeah, I'm starting to like this already. It's starting to feel good. Okay, so so that's going to be basically it. Maybe like these feel nice and lofty. What I did on those is I just actually reduced the amount of gravity. I didn't make them quite realistic. So I made them more like -5 gravity. So you can play with that. That's going to make it feel more lofty, right? And then you can actually lower your speed down to something more like, you know, between 5 and let's say 7 or 6 or 4 and 6. And you can lower these down to something more like 3, 3, 3, and 3. And you should start to get that slower, kind of more lofty feeling velocity out of it. That's pretty good. I kind of like that. That's starting to feel good. Okay. So now that we have pretty much all that working, we can start playing with the physics. So let's go ahead and go right click and let's go into collision. And we're going to need a collision query. And the important one on this is to set this very high. So this is how many queries it's going to do every frame. So if between one frame and another frame it passes through the floor, it literally won't calculate it as a collision. So I usually set this to something more like 100. Now again, this is very costly, so you have to be careful with how high you set that. It's just something to keep in mind that if you really ramp this up, you'll get more accuracy, but you will cost performance. So for something like this, it's not going to matter so much. But in a game where you're really, you know, every frame tick matters, you know, you might want to be a little more cautious with this number. But for now, while you're learning, just, you know, set it to 1,000. It doesn't matter, right? So just as long as you're getting that number high. And if your collisions aren't happening, that's what you need to check, is this number right here. So once we have the query, we can go ahead and go collision result, okay? And the result is now going to make it start to interact with the world. Once you have both of those parts in there, you'll see that the physics start to work, okay? And what you can do here is you can kind of mess with things like your collision and restitution, and that's you know, that's up to you. These are just variables. So friction will obviously make it, you know, slow down more, and the restitution, I believe, is how much it'll bounce. So if it's got a high restitution, it's going to bounce much greater. If it's got a low restitution, it will bounce much less. So if we were to set this to 0, it basically won't bounce. It'll just you know, hit the floor and stop. So I think the standard restitution is something like 0.5. We'll do something more like 0.4 and see how that feels. Because I don't think a rock is going to bounce all that much. Our friction is way too high though. That's why they're not moving, right? So let's set our friction to something like 0.2. And default values are usually pretty good, I find. Again, it's very dependent on what you're doing with it. But yeah, you've got those controls to work with. All right, and you can actually even rotate them so that when they hit, they bounce and rotate. All right, so that's that, and that's the particle effects, okay? For the, I'm sorry, that is the emitter, right? So that's our first part of our particle effect. Now what we need to do is actually make the trails, okay? So that's actually the easier part. So we're just gonna go ahead and add another system, and we're gonna call this, you know, spawner, or we can call this main, whatever, it doesn't matter what you call it. I'm gonna call it main, and this one I'm gonna call trail, just to make it obvious for us to follow. So inside of main, we still have to add one last thing for it to work, okay? So let's go right click, and let's go spawn, and then trail, okay? And now it's gonna be asking for, what do I wanna spawn? Well, we wanna spawn the trail particle effect. So if we save that, we should start to see some stuff happening here. So in the trail, we want a certain number of particles per second. This overrides the particles per second that is going to be in your emitter rate, okay? In fact, we may not even need an emitter rate. I think we can actually get rid of that. So particles per second, let's go ahead and make it something like 10. And as soon as we do this, we should start to see particles being born. Okay, good. So now we're seeing our particles being born, but they're not really doing what we want them to do. So what we want to do is give them a little bit of inherited velocity. So if we do it as 1, it's probably going to be too much. Yeah, see how they're just way too inherited velocity. So let's go ahead and lower that to something like 0.5. And let's go ahead and hit save. And now we should start to see what we want. Okay. Now the other problem that we're having is that we're running out of particles. So in the trail, we want to set this total to something ridiculous like 10,000 to start. Okay, just so that we know we never run out as we're trying to test here and figure this stuff out. Okay, so as you can see, we're now seeing trails behind each of the particles. And what I think we want to do is actually on that emitter trail spawn, we actually don't want much velocity to be inherited at all. So let's go ahead and try point. Yeah, that's going to feel a lot better. Okay, so much less inherited velocity. I have it at 0.1. In fact, a 0 might even be better. Let's try that next. The nice thing about the inherited velocity is that it does kind of move with it. But that said, this might be good enough. Let's put it at 0.1. 0.1 looked good to me. All right, so at 0.1, we're starting to get that nice feel. And we're kind of getting there. Okay, so now we're just going to go ahead and put a billboard on this. So let's go ahead and grab that smoke texture and save it. And actually, let's add an additive blend. It's already there. It's just not very big, so it looks almost exactly the same as the square particle. So with the additive blend, we're starting to get our nice look. So let's go into the size and make this something a little more reasonable, like, I don't know, 0.3 is probably going to do it, or 0.5 maybe, 0.5. It's a little too big. Let's make it 0.3. Let's save that and see how it looks. Still a little too big. So 0.2 is probably going to do it. Yep, 0.2 is looking perfect. So the problem is we're not getting enough spawns. So let's get a lot more spawns out of this. We're spawning 10 particles per second right now. Let's make it something more like 100. and save that. And now we're really getting it to look good. Okay, good. So that's what we kind of want. Now the next problem that we're having is what's our next problem here? Our next problem is that it's not really blending right. So let's take a look at the material billboard. I've got the additive blend on. Let's turn on the 1-bit alpha and turn it off again. Not sure why it's so bright. Yeah, that didn't do anything. Well, there's two things we can do. We can reduce the particle scale over its lifetime. That's the first thing we can do. And let's save that out. And now we'll have that kind of smaller tail on it. So that's starting to feel better already. And what we need to do now is the opacity. So let's go into color. Let's set our colors properly. So let's do like a dark red where it starts. Let's move that over to the left. Let's add another one. Let's make this like that bright whitish yellow again. Actually, I still have it up here. I'll just grab that. Let's put that all the way on the end. Oops. And let's put a middle value of a nice bright orange. Save that. And we're starting to get somewhere. Okay, great. So the last thing is I just think that the opacity is just a little bit too heavy. So let's go into our color and let's kind of mess with the opacity a bit. So I'm going to lower that down in the start so that it's never fully opaque, and I'm going to lower this this end of its lifetime opacity, way down. And now we should start to feel pretty good. Yep. So that's pretty much it. That pretty much does what we wanted to do. Maybe we're spawning a few too many. 100 particles per second isn't really a problem. Let's try turning off this inherited velocity for a second again. Just take a look and see how it feels. Yeah, I actually like that better. Okay. Alright, so that pretty much sums it up. That should teach you everything you need to know. Now you could even add more, particles to this system. If you wanted to add like a smoke trail too, you could do add system, and you can do another add spawn trail, and we can call this one system 3, and we can put smoke on here too. So let's grab our smoke, and in here we can make this total again something like 10,000, and we should start to see particles being born here soon. Oops. So material billboard, it's probably just too small, so let's change our size to something more like 0.3, 0.3. Give that a test. Oh, it's not moving along with it yet. So why is it not moving along with it? Oh, because we're not actually spawning any. So let's go ahead and make our particles per second something like 100. Let's delete our emitter rate, remove component. We should actually do that for the one above it as well. So let's delete that emitter rate. It's not necessary. And let's just adjust our color to be like a dark black. the opacity we're going to set way down on this guy. And we're just going to set our size a little higher. And we'll add some variance. We'll add some variance to this. 0.5. Maybe even more. Let's add something more like 0.9. Alright, let's just make it a solid 1. That's definitely too much. 0.8, 0.7 is probably going to be perfect. Yep, that's pretty good. Color's good. Let's additive blend it. Don't know that that actually benefited anything. Might have actually made it worse. Let's get rid of the additive blend. It's definitely spawning too many, so let's go ahead and say on the emitter we're gonna spawn just a few less. Let's make it more like, I don't know, 9, let's make it 50. Starting to feel better. Alright, so that's the basics, and of course you can tweak this till the cows come home and make it really, really nice. I didn't even add this secondary trail. I was just kind of showing you that you can, so you can do, you know, additional layering effects of trails as well. Alright, so before I make this video just way too long, I'm going to call it quits and say ta-ta for now, and I'll see you guys next time. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it, and let me know. Alright, cool. Talk to you soon. Later.